Hello, DS Infants. Today we will be returning to... not this. I have not played this game before. We will be returning to ICBM, everyone's favorite World War III simulator. Today we'll be playing as... Australia. Yeah. We will of course be playing on hard mode. I don't know what any of this is. I don't really need nukes right off the bat because I haven't played this game before. Oh, well actually, maybe it's these things are cheap. It's cheaper to get a nuke than a fucking radio tower? Wow, alright. What else do I want? I'm actually pretty happy with this. Alright. Alright. I wanna know, what is this? What is all this? I don't know what this is. We're just gonna start. Alright. And to motivate me while we do this, I will be playing a Time for Choosing by Ronald Regan. Let's see if we could get this game done before the end of that video.
The following pre-recorded political program is sponsored by TV
there.
for Goldwater Miller on behalf of Barry Goldwater, Republican candidate for President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, we take pride in presenting a thoughtful address by Ronald Reagan.
Coverage.
Mr. Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Radio.
Thank you and good evening. The sponsor has been identified, but unlike most television programs, the performer hasn't been provided with a script.
Give me...
As a matter of fact, I have been permitted to choose my own words and discuss my own ideas regarding the choice that we face in the next few weeks. I have spent most of my life as a Democrat.
A submarine
I
up
recently have seen fit to follow another course. I believe that the issues confronting us cross party
here.
lines.
Get some carriers going in.
Now, one side in this campaign has been telling us that the issues of this election are the maintenance of peace and prosperity. The line has been used, we've never had it so good. But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future. No nation in history has ever survived the tax burden that reached a third of its national income.
First?
Today, 37 cents
I really like
out of every
aircraft
dollar earned
in
in
this
this
game.
country is the tax
I want
collector's
more
share.
aircraft.
And yet our government continues to spend
Actually,
$17 million a day more than the government takes in.
I kind of want sand.
We haven't balanced our budget 28 out of the last 34 years. We've raised our debt limit 3 times in the last 12 months. And now our national debt is 1.5 times bigger than all the combined debts of
that
all
doesn't
the
make too much
nations of
sense.
the world.
We're gonna roll with
We
it.
have $15 billion in gold
Holy
in our
shit.
treasury. We don't
fuck. Okay, that's not good.
$27.3 billion.
I don't know what's gonna happen now.
And we've just had announced that the dollar of 1939 will now purchase 45 cents in its total value. As for the peace that we would preserve, I wonder who among us would like to approach the wife or mother, husband or son who has died in South Vietnam and ask them if
I
they
would
think
go
this is
drop
the
action
peace
movies.
that should be maintained in the world. They need peace, or he will suddenly be left peace. There can be no real peace while one American is dying someplace else for the rest of us.
Lost one.
We're at war with the most dangerous
Okay, that carrier is gonna be fucking gone. There's no way. Okay.
It's been said if we lose that war and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment.
They've lost their air
the most polluted is the least that has happened. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we see all the freedom we intended for ourselves. Not too long ago, a businessman would escape from castle.
Oh, I lost my
One
air.
of my friends turned to the other and said, "I don't know how lucky we are."
Alright, that sucks a lot.
How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to.
Okay. These guys are just gonna
Told us
go
the
up.
entire story.
They have no
Freedom here, there's no place to escape.
That's okay.
The last
I don't think they
stand
can return anywhere.
And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still
Hopefully
the
this
newest
guy's
and the most
not
unique idea in all the long history of
Oh,
man's relation
fuck.
to man. This is the issue of this election.
He's got
Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual global elite in a far distant capital
That's
can
fine.
plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right.
These are all gonna get
But
shot
I'd like
down.
to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down.
Take out one. Okay.
Man's old age dream, the ultimate individual freedom
Nice. I got
consistent
two.
with law and order, or down to the
Oh
end of
my
totalitarianism.
god. Alright.
And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course.
This is not good.
In this vote harvesting time, they use terms like the Great Society, or as we were told a few days ago by the President,
All right,
we must
we'll kill
accept
that.
greater government activity in the affairs of the people. But they've been
Kill
a little
that.
more explicit in the past, and among themselves, that all of the things I now have quoted appeared in print. These are not Republican accusations. For example, they have voices that say the Cold War will end through our acceptance of a not undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state. Or our traditional system of
Come on.
individual
Come
freedom
on.
is incapable of
Damn.
solving the
Well,
complex
we'll lose this
problems of the
radar tower.
20th century. Senator Fulbright
Ah,
has said at
man.
Stanford University that the Constitution is outmoded. He referred to the President as our moral teacher and our leader. And he says he is hobbled in
carrier.
his task by the restrictions of power imposed on him by this antiquated document.
Awesome.
He must be freed so that he can do for us what he knows is best.
Wait, are you gonna bomb
And
my
Senator
city?
Clark of Pennsylvania, another articulate
Oh, what the
spokesman,
fuck?
defines liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Well, I, for
A
one,
city has
resent it
been
when a
bombed.
representative
What
of the
the
people
shit, man?
refers to you and
Hey,
me,
cool.
the free men and women of this country, as the
You have the
masses.
range?
This is a term
do.
we haven't applied to ourselves in America. But beyond that, the full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things.
Man, that
A
was
government can't control the economy without controlling people. They know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those Founding Fathers, that
5 attack
outside of
bombs.
its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy. Now, we have no
Goddamn.
better example of this than government's
a
involvement
way
in the
to
farm
defend these
economy
things.
over the last 30 years. Since 1955, the
God.
cost of this program
All
has
right.
nearly doubled. 1/4 of farming in America is responsible for
Shit.
85% of the farm surplus.
That ain't happening.
3/4 of farming
Fuck that.
is out on the free market and has known a 21% increase in the per capita consumption of all its produce.
Alright,
You
North
see
America.
that 1/4 of farming?
Okay.
That's
Never
regulated
mind.
and controlled by the federal government. In the last 3 years, we've spent $43 in the feed grain program for every dollar bushel of corn we
There
don't
we go.
grow.
Alright. After
Senator
all
Humphrey
that,
last week charged that Barry
tomfoolery.
Goldwater, as president, would seek to eliminate
oh.
farmers. He should do his homework
I
a little
can't
better.
kill that.
Because he'll find out that we've had a decline of 5 million in the farm population
Can
under
I?
these government programs.
Is it even
He'll
worth
also
it?
find that the Democratic administration has sought to get from
is.
Congress extension
wow,
of the farm
okay.
program to
That's out of
include
my
that
range.
3/4 that is now free. He'll
Fuck,
find that they've
they're gonna blow
also
up
asked
that
for the right to
radio
imprison
tower.
farmers who wouldn't keep books as prescribed by the federal
Structure
government.
destroyed.
The
All right,
Secretary of
fair enough.
Agriculture asked for the right to seize farms through condemnation and resell them to other individuals. And contained in that same program was a provision that would have allowed the federal government to remove 2 million farmers
okay.
from the soil. At the same time, there's been an increase in the Department of
Let's
Agriculture
launch all of our
employees. There's
planes.
now 1 for every 30 farms in the United States. And still, they can't tell us how 66 shiploads of grain headed for Austria
Here we go.
disappeared without
Take
a
'em out.
trace. And Billy Salas has never left shore.
That's a Russian destroyer.
Every responsible farmer and farm organization has repeatedly asked the government to free the farm economy. But who are farmers to know what's best for them?
Come on, boys. Go get him.
Wheat farmers voted against a wheat program. The government passed it anyway. Now the price of bread goes up, the price of
There
wheat
we
for
go.
the farmer goes down.
Take him out.
Meanwhile, back in the city, under urban renewal, the assault on freedom carries on. Private property rights so diluted that public interest is almost anything a few government planners decide it should be. In a program
Oh,
that
some
takes
of these
from the
guys have
needy and
dropped.
gives to the greedy, we see such spectacles as in Cleveland, Ohio, $1.5 million building completed only 3 years ago must be destroyed to make way for what government officials call a more compatible use of the land. The president tells us he's now going to start building public housing units in the thousands. Before we've only built them in the hundreds. But FHA and the Veterans Administration tell us they have 120,000 housing units they've taken back through mortgage foreclosure. For 3 decades, we've sought to solve the problems of unemployment through government planning, and the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. The latest is the Area Redevelopment Agency.
I want just the planes to attack
Rice County, Kansas, a depressed area.
That should take
Rice County, Kansas has 200 oil wells, and the 14,000 people there have over $30 million on deposit personal savings in their bank. When the government tells you you're depressed, lie down and be depressed. We have so many people who can't see a fat man standing beside a thin one without coming to the conclusion the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one.
Oh, is he going to be in the
So they're going to solve all the problems of human misery, government, and government planning.
Oh, they're going to take
Well,
out
government
my
planning
tower.
and
I
welfare
need those.
have the answer. And they've had almost 30 years of it. Shouldn't we expect government to read the score to us once in a while? Shouldn't they be telling us about the decline each year in the number of people needing help? The reduction in the need for public housing?
Destroyers are
the reverse is true.
powerful,
Each year the need
oh
grows
my
greater,
god.
the
He's going to
program
take it out
grows
in one
greater.
hit.
We were told 4 years ago
Yep.
that 17
Alright.
million people went to
That's
bed
fair.
hungry each night. Well, that was probably true. We were all on a diet. But now we're told that 9.3 million families in this country are poverty-stricken on the basis of earning less than $3,000 a year. Welfare spending 10 times greater than it was in the dark depths of the Depression. We're spending $45 billion on welfare. Now do a little arithmetic and you'll find that if we divided the $45 billion up equally among those 9 million poor families, we'd be able to give each family $4,600 a year. And this, added to their present income, should eliminate poverty.
Research complete.
Research, okay.
Direct aid to the poor, however, is only running about $600 per family. It would seem that someplace there must be some overhead.
I found last time I didn't play this. That's short radar.
So now we declare war on poverty, or you too can be a Bobby Baker. Now, do they honestly expect us to believe that if we add $1 billion to the $45 billion we're spending, one more program to the 30-odd we have, and remember, this new program doesn't replace any, it just duplicates existing programs. Do they believe that poverty is suddenly going to disappear by magic? Well, in all fairness, I should explain there is one part of the new program that isn't duplicated. This is the youth feature. We're now going to solve the dropout problem, juvenile delinquency, by reinstituting something like the old PCC camps. And we're going to put our young people in these camps. But again, we do some arithmetic and we find that we're going to spend each year just on room and board for each young person we help $4,700 a year. We can send them to Harvard for $2,700.
Research complete.
Awesome.
Of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting Harvard is the answer to juvenile delinquency.
More radio towers.
But seriously, what are we doing to those we seek to help? Not too long ago, a judge called me here in Los Angeles. He told me that a young woman who'd come before him for a divorce. She had 6 children, was pregnant with her 7th. Under his questioning, she revealed her husband was a laborer earning $250 a month. She wanted the divorce to get an $80 raise. She's eligible for $330 a month on the Aid to Dependent Children program. She got the idea from 2 women in her neighborhood who'd already done that very thing. Yet any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals. They say we're always against things, we're never for anything. Well, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. Now,
hopefully that takes out
research complete.
We're for a provision that destitution should not follow unemployment by reason of old age. To that end, we've accepted Social Security as a step toward meeting the problem. But we're against those entrusted with this program when they practice deception regarding its fiscal shortcomings, when they charge that any
All right.
criticism of the program means that we
No,
want
no,
to
no,
end
no, no, no,
payments
no.
to those people who depend on them for a livelihood. They've called it insurance to us in 100 million pieces
Whoa.
of literature. But then they appeared before the Supreme Court, and they testified it was a welfare program. They only used the term insurance to sell it to the people. And they said Social Security dues are a tax for the general use of the government. And the government has used that tax. There is no fund. Because Robert Byers, the actuarial head, appeared before a congressional committee and admitted that Social Security as of this moment is $298 billion in the hole. But he said there should be no cause for worry, because as long as they had the power to tax, they could always take away from the people whatever they needed to bail them out of trouble. And they're doing just that. A young man 21 years of age working at an average salary. His Social Security contribution would in the open market buy him an insurance policy that would guarantee $220 a month at
What
age
are you
65.
doing?
The government
Why do they just
promises
do that?
127.
Stop
He could live
attacking.
it up until he's 31 and then take out a policy that would pay more than
Stop.
Social Security. Now, are we
told you
so
not to
lacking in
engage.
business sense that we can't put this program on a sound basis so that people
Is
who
that what
do
it is?
require those payments will find they can get them when they're due, that the cupboard
Oh my
isn't
God,
bare?
we're gonna lose more fighters.
Barry
All right.
Goldwater thinks we can. At the same time, can't we introduce voluntary features that would permit a citizen who can do better on his own to be excused upon presentation of evidence that he had made provision for the non-earning years? Should we not allow a widow with children to work
Production
and not
complete.
lose the benefits supposedly paid for by her deceased husband?
Come on.
Shouldn't you and I be allowed to declare who our beneficiaries will be under this program, which we cannot do?
Whoa.
I think we're more telling our senior citizens that no one in this country should be denied medical care because of a lack of funds. But I think we're against forcing all citizens, regardless of need, into a compulsory government program, especially when we have such examples as was announced last week when France admitted that their Medicare program is now bankrupt. They've come to the end of the road. In addition, was Barry Goldwater so irresponsible when he suggested that our government give up its program of deliberate planned inflation,
Do they have
so that when
something
you do get your Social Security pension, a dollar will buy a dollar's worth and not 45 cents worth? I think we're for an international organization where the nations of the world can seek peace. But I think we're against subordinating American interests to an organization that has become so structurally unsound that today you can muster a two-thirds vote on the floor of the General Assembly among nations that represent less than 10% of the world's population. I think we're against the hypocrisy of assailing our allies because here and there they cling to a colony, while we engage in a conspiracy of silence and never open our mouths about the millions of people enslaved in the Soviet colonies in the satellite nations. I think we're for aiding our allies by sharing of our material blessings with those nations which share in our fundamental beliefs. But we're against doling out money government to government, creating bureaucracy, if not
What is
socialism,
this?
all over the world.
Where?
We set out to help 19
Oh, I just read
countries.
that.
We're helping 107. We've spent $146 billion. With that money, we bought a $2 million yacht for Haile Selassie. We bought dress
Come on,
suits
boys.
for Greek undertakers, extra wives for Kenya government officials. We bought 1,000 TV sets for a place where they have no electricity. In the last 6 years, 52 nations have bought $7 billion worth of our gold, and all 52 are receiving foreign aid from this country. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size.
Come
So
on.
government programs once launched never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth.
Yes.
Federal employees
Got.
number 2.5
Holy shit.
million.
All right.
And federal, state, and local, 1 out of 6 of the nation's workforce employed by government. These proliferating bureaus with their thousands of regulations
if
have
I
crossed as many of our constitutional
that?
safeguards. How many of us realize that today federal agents can invade a man's property without a warrant? They can impose a fine without a formal hearing, let alone a trial by jury, and they can seize and sell his property at auction to
Oh, man,
enforce
I'm
the payment of
all
that
those.
fine. In In Chico County, Arkansas, James Weir overplanted his rice allotment. The government obtained a $17,000 judgment, and a U.S. Marshal sold his 960-acre farm at auction. The government said it was necessary as a warning to others.
Oh, we were so close.
Last February
Man,
19th at the University of Minnesota,
Okay.
Norman Thomas, six-time candidate for president on the party ticket, said if Barry Goldwater became president, he would stop the advance of socialism in the United States. I think that's exactly what he will do.
Okay. Everybody except for the carrier. Hell yeah.
But as a former Democrat, I can tell you Norman Thomas isn't the only man who has drawn this parallel to socialism in the present administration. Because back in 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, a great American, came before the American people.
East Asia?
Charged that the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road under the banners of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And he walked away from his party and he never returned until the day he died.
Okay.
Because to this day, the leadership of that party has been taking that party, that honorable party, down the road in the image of the Labour Socialist Party of England. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to the, or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. Every businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government.
Air wings replenished.
Has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. Our Democratic opponents seem unwilling to debate these issues. They want to make you and I believe that this is a contest between two men, that we're to choose just between two personalities. Well, what of this man that they would destroy? And in destroying, they would destroy that which he represents, the ideas that you and I hold dear. Is he the brash and shallow and trigger-happy man they say he is?
What the shit?
Well, I've been privileged to know him when.
That is.
I knew him long before he ever dreamed of trying for high office. And I can tell you personally, I've never known a man in my life I believed so incapable of doing a dishonest or dishonorable thing. This is a man who in his own business, before he entered politics, instituted a profit-sharing plan before unions had ever thought of it. He put in health and medical insurance for all his employees. He took 50% of the profits before taxes and set up a retirement program, a pension plan for all his employees. He sent monthly checks for life to an employee who was ill and couldn't work. He provides nursing care for the children of mothers who work in the stores. When Mexico was ravaged by the floods in the Rio Grande, he climbed in his airplane and took medicine and supplies down there. An ex-GI told me how he met him. It was the week before Christmas during the Korean War, and he was at the Los Angeles airport trying to get a ride home to Arizona for Christmas. And he said that a lot of servicemen there and no seats available on the planes. And then a voice came over the loudspeaker and said, any men in uniform wanting a ride to Arizona, go to runway such and such.
Jesus.
And they went down there. There was a fellow named Barry Goldwater sitting in his plane. Every day in those weeks before Christmas, all day long, he'd load up the plane, fly it to Arizona, fly them to their homes, fly back over to get another load. During the hectic, split-second timing of a campaign, this is a man who took time out to sit beside an old friend.
Production complete.
His campaign managers were understanding the impatience, but he said there aren't many left who care what happens to her. I'd like her to know I care. This is a man who said to his 19-year-old son, there is no foundation like the rock of honesty and fairness. And when you begin to build your life on that rock, with the cement of the faith in God that you have, then you have a real start.
1, 2.
This is not a man who could carelessly send other people's sons to war. And that is the issue of this campaign that makes all the other problems I've discussed academic.
5.
Unless we realize we're in a war that must be won. Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution. Peace
Air
without
wings
victory.
replenished.
They call their policy accommodation. And they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us. All who oppose them are indicted as warmongers. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. Not an easy one.
Research complete.
You and I have the courage to tell our elected officials
Alright.
that we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right. We cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with slavery. Alexander Hamilton said a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second. Surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. What then? Well, Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side, he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better read than dead. Or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery.
Oh, shit.
If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay, there is a point beyond which they must not advance. And this is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
Hey, Mama.
Thank you, Ronnie, for this very stirring speech. I am John Kilroy, National Chairman, TV for Goldwater Miller. I want to ask each of you I want to ask each of you to take
I
part
don't think this guy knows
in this
how many
important
ships I have.
presidential campaign by contributing what you can to keep the Goldwater Crusade on the air. Send $1, $10, $50, or any amount to TV for Goldwater Miller, Box 80, Los Angeles 51. I repeat, TV Goldwater Miller, Box 80, Los Angeles 51.
The pre-recorded political program was paid for by TV for Goldwater Miller on behalf of Barry Goldwater, Republican candidate for President of the United States.
Awesome. Wow, that's a lot of air bases. It's a little scary, actually. Enemy carrier? Fuck that. We get a little bit of air cover.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I haven't even announced yet, and you make me think I've been elected. Ladies and gentlemen, you have given me a welcome that's so heartwarming, it's something I will remember always. In addition, if I had no such reasons at all to be happy about the form of the greeting and the introductions and all here tonight, I could be grateful because every once in a while, being introduced, I get self-conscious when they begin to introduce me and start mentioning the pictures that I've been in. Now, I don't mean that I'm ashamed of them, but everyone who's been around Hollywood for any length of time has been in some movies that the studio didn't want them good, it wanted them Thursday. And I've had my share.
Research complete.
In the old times, you usually could count on the passing years making you forget those pictures. Now you just stay up late enough at night in front of the TV set and they all come back to haunt us. Sometimes I think it's like looking at a sun you never knew you had.
They have anti-ballistic missiles.
That takes a second, doesn't it? I have a friend in the business who stays up late to look at his old movies just to watch his hairline recede. But you know, I've been protesting the growth of government for a number of years. I've had a concern lest the permanent structure of government become so big that it would become beyond the control of Congress and beyond the will of the people. And I have believed that this is a problem that crosses party lines. I've seen an interesting development down through the years. When I first suggested the danger of government control inherent in so many federal handouts, there were people who denied vehemently that any such thing could ever take place. And yet, before too long, the same people were saying, what's wrong with government control? And in the recent days, we've heard representatives in the higher echelons of government ask us, well, are you afraid of your own government? Well, to tell you the truth, I am. And all of us should be. And I speak not in a partisan sense of an administration or individuals. I'm talking of the institution of government. Wasn't this the admonition of the Founding Fathers? That government tends to grow, to take on power, until freedom eventually is lost. The fact is, and we can't escape it, only government is capable of tyranny. I realize this is a controversial subject, particularly as we approach an election year. But then if you didn't take up things that were controversial, you'd never talk at all. There was a man knocked on a door one day, and a small boy answered, and the man said, "Son, is your father home?" And the boy said, "No." He said, "Is your mother home?" And the boy said, "No." And finally he said, "Well, son, I'm your uncle on your father's side." And the kid said, "Well, I guess you can come in, but I'll tell you right now, you're on the wrong side." In 1772, the Boston Committee of Correspondence proclaimed the right to life, liberty, and
Production
property.
complete.
2 years later, in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress declared that Americans were entitled to life, liberty, and property. June of 1776, the Virginia Bill of Rights asserted that all men were equally free and independent, with the means of possessing and the right to possess and acquire property. 3 weeks later came the Declaration of Independence, a bloody war, victory, and then a new nation which would be based on a Constitution and a Bill of Rights. Life, liberty, and property had become life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And 70 years would go by before England's Lord Acton would comment on the task of these men and what they had accomplished with this document. He would say they had solved 2 problems which had heretofore baffled the most enlightened nations. They had prodigiously increased the power of the national government and had founded it on the principle of equality without surrendering the securities of freedom and property. And it's true. Our Constitution is a contract guaranteeing the most limited and equitable government in the long history of man's relation to man. Now, however, while the national power is prodigious, what has happened to security for freedom and our right to the ownership of the fruit of our toil? French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville 100 years ago said the end of freedom comes when the party in power learns to perpetuate itself in this sector. So what does happen to freedom when the executive branch of government can use the money taken from the people in order to coerce them? A foolish fear? Representative Glenn Andrews introduced an amendment to the poverty program on the floor of Congress. It is almost inconceivable that such an amendment would be required. It is even more inconceivable that the amendment was overwhelmingly repudiated and defeated. It was a simple amendment that would prohibit poverty funds from being used for political purposes. Make no mistake about it. The party in power has legislated into existence a $1,800 million campaign fund for 1966. Five years ago, we reached a new frontier. And now we're face to face with a great society. And along the way, we've added $31 billion to our debt, but we've decreased our gold holdings until concern is felt for the solvency of our currency. And very shortly, the coins we jingle in our pocket will no longer have the ring of silver. But have no fear. We reached something of the height of absurdity when in a press conference recently we were told that the government would stand behind those artificial coins and was prepared to exchange them at any time for paper. We've discovered that every family with an income of less than $3,000 a year is poverty-stricken. At the same time, we learn that the cost of government prorates out to $3,300 per family. We reach an all-time high in food prices, as every housewife here knows. But the farmer who produces that food receives the lowest percentage of the market basket dollar he's ever received in history. And his debt in relation to income is at an all-time high, higher even than on the eve of the 1929 crash. 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, there were no daily casualty lists. No wives and mothers receiving telegrams that began, "We regret to inform you." The last campaign found our opponents presenting themselves as conservatives, in the sense that they would make no drastic change in our easy, prosperous, and affluent way. They would maintain the status quo. That's Latin for the mess we're in. We, on the other hand, were presented as radicals who'd bring about some cataclysmic upheaval. Well, now the wraps are off the Great Society, and a multitude of messages and legislation has made it plain we're to have the welfare state, with an unprecedented federalization of American life. June 30th last, Congress raised the debt limit for the 7th time in 5 years. But our government spends $260 million a day, $10 million more each day than we were spending just a year ago. We're told that we're enjoying an unprecedented prosperity. But 42 government agencies, the government has just informed us, are spending $70 billion a year on public welfare. And serious discussion is given by men in high place in government to the idea that there is no longer any necessity to connect work with income, and that a man simply by being born should be assured of an annual income with no need to work. The ancient Hebrew book, the Talmud, tells us that for a father to fail to teach his son to earn a living is the same as teaching him to steal, for that might be the inevitable result. Our limited government with its decentralized powers has given way to planners, and they've laid an increasingly heavy hand on every facet of our lives. To quote de Tocqueville again, he warned that such a government would cover the face of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform. And thus the will of man is not shattered, but softened and guided until the nation is reduced to a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which government is the shepherd. Well, the shepherd, the president, is fond of quoting in these days from the scriptures. His favorite seems to be 1 Isaiah, the 18th verse. Come, let us reason together. Now that has a sort of a warm and cozy sound, doesn't it? But let your eyes stray down a line or two into the next verses, the lines that are not quoted aloud. If ye refuse, ye shall be devoured with the sword.
Alliance formed. Freedom is very fragile. We've only known a few moments of it in all man's Alliance
history.
formed.
And most of those moments have taken place here, in this land, under this constitutional system and under our
West
economic
Asia?
system of free
Oh,
enterprise.
that was a mistake.
But
West
freedom
Asia.
is also indivisible. It isn't spelled with an S. You can't elect to be partly free and partly slave. You're free,
Alliance
or you're
formed.
not free. If we ever decide we need a new Declaration of Independence, I hope we'll keep one line from the old. He has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Today, for every 10,000 of us, it only takes 12 doctors to keep us well and healthy. It only takes 40 mechanics and oil station attendants for every 10,000 of us to keep our automobiles running. 37 telephone employees to keep the vast network of telephones running in this country.
That's not good.
But it
Alliance
takes
formed.
130 federal employees for every 10,000 to administer the affairs of state. Federal employees outnumber state employees in 30 of the 50 states. I don't know about yours, but that's true of California, and in California, that isn't easy. The businessman, harassed and eaten out of our substance, the businessman spends 35% of his time filling out government forms and regulations. It has been estimated that this government paperwork costs American industry $20 billion a
Alliance
year,
formed.
which must be added into the price tag.
And it costs another $7 billion a year just to handle government's end of that paperwork and to store it, and already it requires 25 million cubic feet. Sometime back, to show you how this can happen, there was a little New England town that decided to get in on the surplus food idea. Now, this is a good idea. No one can quarrel with the fact that if we can raise a surplus rather than waste it, it should be distributed to those people who have need. So this little town got in on this and got its share of free federal surplus food. And then they woke up one day and discovered that they were being flooded under a great load of paperwork demanded in connection with this handout. And they discovered finally they put on so many new city employees just to handle this that it was cheaper to get out of the program and buy the groceries retail at the corner market. Now we've declared war on poverty. Now no one again quarrels with the humanitarian aims. I don't think any one of us want to be like the fellow that heard about the war on poverty and went right out and threw a hand grenade at a beggar. But in getting the program passed, we heard a great deal about one state, West Virginia. Oh, this became a household word. This was the very center of poverty and distress and unemployment. Some of us thought that the whole war would be fought right there in West Virginia. Now the program is adopted. West Virginia gets $400,000. Texas gets $10 million. We're winning the war, though, at least on one front, on their own bureaucratic home ground. $19,000 a year is a good salary, and it's a very high rate of pay in government salaries. As a matter of fact, there's only one employee out of 1,000 in the Department of Defense gets $19,000 a year. Only 1 out of 500 in the Department of Agriculture. But in the new poverty program, there's 1 out of 19. Gum Springs, Virginia was awarded $74,000, $54,000 for administrators' salaries, $20,000 for the poor.
Whoa.
While one voice in government tells us that we're enjoying this great prosperity, another voice tells us that 1 out of 5 in our country is suffering from poverty and destitution. Now, if that figure's true, it shouldn't be too hard to find the people who need the help under this program. Well, in my hometown of Dixon, Illinois, a committee of 10, self-appointed, beholden to no voters, has established itself and asked the government for a $38,000 grant so they can go on a search to find out if there's any poverty there. It breaks down to $10,200 for the chairman and $7,200 each for 2 assistants, and the balance will go for secretaries, mailing, office expense, and travel. In another area, more than 2,000 college graduates have been hired as a part of the program to study the culture of poverty. Now, no one disagrees with the youth portion of that program. The idea that we should salvage, if possible, those young people who, for whatever reason, have failed to fit themselves for the responsibilities of adult life. But we take over a hotel, and we install there young ladies who have been lifted from destitute families, and now they're to be trained so they'll be self-reliant and can go out on their own and make a living. But while they're being retrained, they're given maid service so they won't have to make their own beds. And the program prorates out to $7,000 a year for each young lady we're going to help. There are a lot of families in this country raising fine, productive citizens on less than $7,000 a year. I can think of no higher, more noble purpose than to take young men and to make sure that they get an equal chance in the start in life. But we have such a program now, and we put the young men in camps for retraining, and we pay them a higher rate of pay than we give the young man who puts on a uniform and goes out to defend his country.
What is this?
I am sure that all of us are agreed, every responsible citizen is agreed, that we should provide shelter for those people who, through no fault of their own, lack adequate housing. For some time, the government has provided public housing. But now those who administer the program have expressed concern after 3 decades of it. Concern because an entire generation has grown up, raising children. And a second and a third generation now are growing up taking it for granted that this is an acceptable way of life. And there is no incentive for them to improve themselves because to get a raise might destroy their eligibility for continuing to live on a subsidy in the public housing. And yet, never does government accept that it might be responsible with some of its programs for this trend or this tendency. No, now we're going to have a program subsidizing rent. And under the technicalities of the program, people with incomes up to $11,000 or $12,000 a year will be eligible to live in a house or apartment or a neighborhood beyond their means with their thrifty new neighbors, taxed to help pay the differential in their rent. A variety of programs have diluted private property rights so that public interest is anything the planners decide it should be. For generations, we've had traditional laws of eminent domain.
Research
We have
complete.
recognized the occasional need of government to take a citizen's property when there is a clear and present need for that particular piece of property in the public interest. But the citizen had his day in court, first to establish that the government paid a fair price, and second, that the government should be forced to prove that there was a clear and present need. Now, urban renewal grants the government the right to force the sale of private property or resale by government to other private citizens who can then use that property to make profit. And we have averaged selling urban renewal properties to private citizens for 30% of the investment that we, the taxpayers, have in that property. Again, I say the purpose is noble. The idea of providing decent homes for every American and eliminating slums. But 1 million people have been displaced with a bulldozer and have wound up in new slums paying a higher rent. The law says that displaced must be offered standard housing at rents they can afford in convenient locations. But if standard housing at rents they could afford in convenient locations had been available, they wouldn't have needed an urban renewal program. They'd have moved there on their own. Robert Weaver, the Federal Housing Commissioner, has said in the beginning, he has made this statement public, the government gave the use of the land to the people to speed its development. Now, I didn't remember history that way. I thought we were here and on the land and we created the government. But he says, but he has announced now, it is the policy of the government to seek to reclaim complete control of the use of the land. Planes equipped with surveying instruments fly over American farms. They survey from the air accurately to see whether the farmer has violated his planting allotment. And if he has, he's guilty as charged. No day in court. And he's fined, and if he can't pay the fine, the regulations prescribe the government can seize his farm and sell it at auction to enforce the payment of that fine. For 30 years, we've had a farm program. We've spent billions to make the farmer more prosperous and to remove unneeded surplus land from farm production to reduce the surplus. And during that same period, the national income has tripled, but the farmer's income is smaller than it was 30 years ago. And we've increased the number of acres in cultivation by 50 million.
Awesome. All right.
Every dollar that we spent on price stabilization in 1948, we are today spending $25. We've reduced the number of farmers by half, and the government says another 2.5 million farmers are unneeded and must be retrained and moved to city jobs. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Appalachian program provides millions of dollars to reclaim marginal land so that the unemployed can be made farmers in that area and add to the present farm surplus. And an ominous question remains unanswered. Who will decide which citizens must leave the land? And how will the decision be made? How also will we explain that the same government that says that we need only 1 million large commercial farms now, that there is no need for the small family farmer, is still the government that tells us with another voice that no farm of over 160 acres can receive water from federal irrigation projects. Somehow one suspects that government, in all of its involvement in the farm program, will turn out to be something less than a jolly green giant. Meanwhile, the network of rules grows more minute and more uniform, as de Tocqueville warned. Down on the Mason-Dixon line, on a highway that is used by northerners taking vacations in the south, there's an oil station. Very enterprising fellow running it. A little triangle of ground, you know, between the sidewalk and the driveway that so often is covered with gravel or paved over. He planted a few cotton bushes there. Now when a tourist stops in from the north, he picks a cotton boll off the bush right there in front of them and hands it to them as a souvenir of their trip to the south. He's just been fined by the federal government for planting cotton without an allotment. The post office. Just recently, the post office was exposed as having for the last couple of years taken mail, letters addressed to citizens, from the mail and turning them over to the Internal Revenue Service if those citizens were behind or delinquent in the paying of their income tax. And now we learn that Washington is going to subsidize art and literature. The plan calls for 2 czars with millions of dollars which they will apportion on the basis of what they consider is meaningful in art and literature. Well, now, if they follow the pattern of some of the government-sponsored scientific research programs, there is reason for concern. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I sometimes have a suspicion that the government is subsidizing just plain intellectual curiosity when I see thousands of dollars spent on research in philology and faunal affinities of fossil bryozoa in the Middle Ordovician through Silurian. Now, the only thing I understand in that is that phrase, in the middle. There I know who they're talking about. But nothing is too small for the government to overlook. The government in Washington is now concerned with our ability to enjoy ourselves in the great outdoors, recreational facilities. They've just issued a 134-page booklet on the subject. It's full of profundities. I wonder how we managed to get along without it up till now. For example, if you lay out a campsite, you should provide drinking fountains at such a height that the drinking level is convenient for the persons using the fountain. But wait till you get to the exciting chapter on wildlife. Insects crawling into the ears of outdoorsmen sometimes create painful conditions. I got news for them. It's no fun when it happens indoors. But wait a minute. That isn't all they have to say about wildlife. If your recreational area has a bathhouse intended for the use of both men and women, it should be divided into 2 parts by a tight partition. Now you know we'd have never thought of that one by ourselves. Honestly, though, I know that they only mean to be helpful. I know that it's really human nature and they're motivated by the most humanitarian of idealism. It's just natural for them to see the problems and see the immediate problem and to suggest, oh, if we had a little more money, a little more power, what we could do for the people. Now, in an atmosphere of emergency and excessive zeal for our welfare, the federal government proposes to invade an area, the traditional province of the local community and state, the finest public school system in all the world.
Production complete.
With no real determination yet that the federal government is the best manager of our educational affairs, a suspicion prevails that they're not so much interested in speeding progress as they are in asserting authority in every conceivable aspect of the educational system. An educational system that has worked very well and has been responsive to parental opinion. But Washington insists that it only wants to help solve the financial problems attendant on our rapid growth. Well, problems there are, particularly because the federal government in recent years has dried up so many sources of local revenue by usurping those sources for its own tax policies. But that same government has figures that reveal that we at the local level in the last decade have increased school revenue by 156%. We have built in 10 years $30 billion worth of classrooms. We have reduced the ratio of pupil to teacher and pupil to classroom. And we've increased the average teacher's salary by 65%. And yet every suggestion that we make for earmarking tax money and allowing it to remain at the local level without running it through those puzzle palaces on the Potomac first is met with great resistance. Already there are 135 separate federal agencies and offices doling out money at the college level. Some time ago, a group of distinguished college presidents, alarmed at the extent to which academic freedom has been compromised by these vast money grants, went to Washington, and they had a proposal they'd worked out. A proposal for allowing the individual citizen to compute his income tax and then deduct a specified amount and contribute it to the college of his choice instead of paying it in income tax. And the government would be allowed to determine the proper amount that would solve the problem and yet not disrupt the government's own economy or need for revenue. And thus they would get around the question of church and state, the separation of same, if an individual citizen chose to contribute his money to a church-supported school. Over and over again in Washington, they kept asking, but why won't this system work? And finally a Freudian slip occurred. Francis Keppel, United States Director of Education, blurted out, "You don't understand, under the plan you propose, we couldn't achieve our social objectives." Social objectives. And now we uncover a memorandum, thanks to the press actually, a memorandum in the Community Relations Service of the Poverty Program. Has nothing really to do with education, but the memorandum is very disturbing in this sentence. We should conduct a systematic effort to contact all publishers and school boards to encourage their publication and adoption of textbooks conforming to established standards. Well, if the government is going to build the schools and buy the books, issue scholarships, make judgments, and exert pressure, what if one day that pressure is of a political nature not to our liking? Education is the bulwark of freedom, but you remove it too far from the community and the parents' control, and education becomes the tool of tyranny. Already here and there in our land, there are too many students that are studying from textbooks that devote a chapter to public welfare and not one line to Patrick Henry. Sometimes when you look at the problem, you think that government's like a baby. It's an alimentary canal with an appetite at one end and no sense of responsibility at the other. We're taxed in our food and our drink and our shelter, with the government taking a higher percentage from the productive free economy than any government has ever done in history without ruin. So-called tax reform, when it is suggested, winds up as the old shell game. They just rearrange it, shift it around, and apply it someplace else, as we discovered with the so-called tax cut we thought we had.
Research complete.
Our tax policy today is based on the idea that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Well, we'd better take another look. We're robbing Paul to pay Paul, and we're all named Paul. Peter went bankrupt a long time ago. Inflation, planned and deliberate over the last 3 decades, has reduced the value of our dollar to 35.5 cents. Well, how did this come about? Well, mainly because we have perverted our Constitution. perverted it with regard to a welfare clause that doesn't exist, perverted it with regard to the misuse of the taxation system, perverted it with regard to the interpretation of the clauses on interstate commerce. And we've done it under such high-sounding phrases as the greatest good for the greatest number, or one man, one vote, forgetting that majority rule becomes mob rule unless there is a set of ground rules protecting the individual. One's right to life. One's right to life, to liberty, to the freedom of worship, to speak, to assemble, in short, our God-given unalienable rights, may not be submitted to a vote. The very purpose of the Bill of Rights was to forever put them beyond reach of majority rule. 100 years ago, the problem of the nation was a nation half slave and half free, and whether such a nation could survive. And today it's a world half slave and half free, and whether mankind himself can survive. We call out to the guard in the night and ask, does all go well? And echoing back from the shores of the Potomac comes the word, there's nothing to fear. Nothing to fear but an evil enemy who since World War II has increased the enslavement of from 8% of the world's population to near 40%. Every lesson of history tells us that as a nation has grown in culture and refinement and advanced, it has softened, and when confronted by the barbarian, the less cultured, the barbarians have triumphed. You and I have come to our moment of truth. Does man exist only by permission of and for the sake of the state, the group, marching toward eternity in a super ant-heap, or does he control his own destiny? This is a question that must be answered by all of us, regardless of party. To those who are Democrats, ask yourselves if the leadership of your party still follows the precepts of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland. Take the platform of 1932 on which Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected, with its demand for a 25% reduction in the cost of the federal government, for restoration of constitutional limits on the power of that government, for a return to the states and the local communities and the individuals of the rights that had been taken from them. Ask which party would be most at home today with those promises. I know that the bond of party loyalty is very strong. I was a Democrat most of my life. I know it is hard to make a change from party loyalty and the party of your lifelong choice without a feeling that you're being treasonable or unfair.
Research complete.
I say to you, have no feeling of disloyalty if you have decided you no longer can follow the leadership of that party tonight, because the leadership of that party has long since abandoned you. And now to those of us of another party, to those who are Republicans. Today the Republican Party is the vehicle we must use as the party of opposition. Opposition to the misguided leadership at home, and opposition to all the evil abroad that threatens the dignity and freedom of man in every land. And it's an awesome responsibility. And you and I who are Republicans cannot meet it with a splintered party. For too long, we have been Republicans complete with descriptive adjectives and hyphens before the word Republican. Moderate Republicans, liberal Republicans, conservative Republicans, whatever label we chose. The truth is we've been sucker Republicans. Those adjectives and those hyphens were given to us by our opponents, and the time has come to bundle them up and give them back.
Production complete.
If you have to hang on to the hyphen, just be a good or a Republican. We can cringe in the shadow of a philosophy we detest but fear to challenge, or we can rise from a defeat and begin the second round of our struggle to restore the Republic. And now there are those among us, there are Republicans today who understandably, so hungry to get back to the position that we once held, to reestablish some equality in this two-party system, restore the imbalance we now have, who have suggested, even somewhat cynically, that maybe we should start talking to voter blocs and making promises that perhaps we should even reshape our party in the image of the victorious party, on the basis that perhaps an imitation might get more votes than we've been extracting.
That's pretty cool.
Well, I'd like to suggest there is a bloc we can appeal to. It's a voter bloc of millions and millions of people. It crosses party lines, ethnic lines, religious and racial lines, economic lines. It's made up of millions of unsung heroes, people who get up in the morning, send their kids to school and go to work. They contribute to their church and their charity and their community. They believe that they were created in God's image, that God is the author of their rights and freedom. And they're disturbed because their children can no longer ask God's blessing in school.
Yeah. All right.
I say to you, that block of voters can be ours. Not if we come to them with any imitation or ersatz program, but only if we're willing to stand on principle. Yes, let's be willing to tell them that we too want to solve and will solve, as to the best of our ability, the problems of poverty and hunger and health and old age and unemployment. But we believe we can do that without resorting to undue compulsion and fiscal irresponsibility. That we believe we can put a floor beneath which no American will be asked to live in degradation, but at the same time we will not erect a ceiling above which no citizen can fly without being penalized for his initiative and his effort. And let us tell them that hard though the problems may be that face us on the world scene, we will not buy our protection from the threat of the bomb by trading away the freedom of people in other lands not ours to give. And let's tell them that if their sons are going to be asked to fight and die for their country, at the same time they'll be allowed to win. I say look deep in your own hearts and ask yourselves if you possibly can have any difference with any other republic that is more important than this challenge that faces us tonight. If you have, if you're unwilling to meet this challenge, then you'd better start preparing, deciding what you will tell your children it was that you found more important than freedom. They'll want to know.
Good evening. I'm Ruth Heinerfeld of the League of Women Voters Education Fund. Next Tuesday is Election Day. Before going to the polls, voters want to understand the issues and know the candidates' positions. Tonight, voters will have an opportunity to see and hear the major party candidates for the presidency state their views on issues that affect us all. The League of Women Voters is...
Thank you.
My fellow Americans, this is the 34th time I'll speak to you from the Oval Office, and the last. We've been together 8 years now, and soon it'll be time for me to go. But before I do, I wanted to share some thoughts, some of which I've been saving
Air
for a
wings
long
replenished.
time. It's been the honor of my life to be your president. So many of you have written the past few weeks to say thanks, but I could say as much to you. Nancy and I are grateful for the opportunity you gave us to serve. One of the things about the presidency is that you're always somewhat apart. We spend a lot of time going by too fast in a car someone else is driving, and seeing the people through tinted glass, the parents holding up a child, the way you saw too late and couldn't return. And so many times I wanted to stop and reach out from behind the glass and connect. Well, maybe I can do a little of that tonight. People ask how I feel about leaving, and the fact is, parting is such sweet sorrow. The sweet part is California, and the ranch, and freedom. The sorrow, the goodbyes, of course, and leaving this beautiful place. You know, down the hall and up the stairs from this office is the part of the White House where the president and his family live. There are a few favorite windows I have up there that I like to stand and look out of early in the morning. The view is over the grounds here to the Washington Monument, then the Mall, and the Jefferson Memorial. But on mornings when the humidity is low, you can see past the Jefferson to the river, the Potomac, and the Virginia shore. Someone said that's the view Lincoln had when he saw the smoke rising from the Battle of Bull Run. But I see more prosaic things. The grass on the banks, the morning traffic as people make their way to work, now and then a sailboat on the river. I've been thinking a bit at that window. I've been reflecting on what the past 8 years have meant and mean. And the image that comes to mind like a refrain is a nautical one. A small story about a big ship and a refugee and a sailor. It was back in the early 80s at the height of the boat people, and the sailor was hard at work on the carrier Midway, which was patrolling the South China Sea. The sailor, like most American servicemen, was young, smart, and fiercely observant. The crew spied on the horizon a leaky little boat. Crammed inside were refugees from Indochina, hoping to get to America. The Midway sent a small launch to bring them to the ship in safety. As the refugees made their way through the choppy seas, one spied the sailor on deck and stood up and called out to him. He yelled, "Hello, American sailor. Hello, freedom man."
Production complete.
A small moment for the big meeting. A moment the sailor who wrote it in the letter couldn't get out of his mind. And when I saw it, neither could I. Because that's what it was to be an American in the 1980s. We stood again for freedom. I know we always have, but in the past few years, the world, again, and in a way we ourselves, rediscovered it. It's been quite a journey this decade, and we held together through some stormy seas. And at the end, together, we're reaching our destination. The fact is, from Grenada to the Washington and Moscow summits, from the recession of 81 to 82, to the expansion that began in late 82 and continues to this day, we've made a difference. The way I see it, there were two great triumphs, two things that I'm proudest of. One is the economic recovery in which the people of America created and filled 19 million new jobs. The other is the recovery of our morale. America is respected again in the world and looked to for leadership. Something that happened to me a few years ago reflects some of this. It was back in 1981, and I was attending my first big economic summit, which was held that year in Canada. The meeting place rotates among the member countries. The opening meeting was a formal dinner for the heads of government of the 7 industrialized nations. Well, I sat there like the new kid in school and listened, and it was all Francois this and Helmut that. They dropped titles and spoke to one another on a first-name basis. Well, at one point, I sort of leaned in and said, "My name's Ron." But in that same year, we began the actions we felt would ignite an economic comeback. Cut taxes and regulation, started to cut spending, and soon the recovery began. 2 years later, another economic summit with pretty much the same cast. At the big opening meeting, we all got together, and all of a sudden, just for a moment, I saw that everyone was just sitting there looking at me. And then one of them broke the silence. "Tell us about the American miracle," he said. Well, back in
Production
1980,
complete.
when I was running for president, it was all so different. Some pundits said our programs would result in catastrophe. Our views on foreign affairs would cause war. Our plans for the economy would cause inflation to soar and bring about economic collapse. I even remember one highly respected economist saying back in 1982 that the engines of economic growth have shut down here, and they're likely to stay that way for years to come. Well, he and the other opinion leaders were wrong. The fact is, what they called radical was really right. What they called dangerous was just desperately needed. And in all of that time, I won a nickname, the Great Communicator. But I never thought it was my style or the words I used that made a difference. It was the content. I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things. And they didn't spring full bloom from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation, from our experience, our wisdom, and our belief in the principles that have guided us for 2 centuries. They called it
Research
the Reagan
complete.
Revolution. Well, I'll accept that.
Jesus.
But for me, it always seemed more like the great rediscovery. A rediscovery of our values and our common sense. Common sense told us that when you put a big tax on something, the people will produce less of it. So we cut the people's tax rates, and the people produced more than ever before. The economy bloomed like a plant that had been cut back and could now grow quicker and stronger. Our economic program brought about the longest peacetime expansion in our history. Real family income up, the poverty rate down, entrepreneurship booming, and an explosion in research and new technology. We're exporting more now than ever because American
Production
industry
complete.
became more competitive. And at the same time, we summoned the national will to knock down protectionist walls abroad instead of erecting them at home. Common sense also told us that to preserve the peace, we'd have to become strong again after years of weakness and confusion. So we rebuilt our defenses. And this new year, we toasted the new peacefulness around the globe. Not only have the superpowers actually begun to reduce their stockpiles of nuclear weapons, and hopefully even more progress is bright, but the regional conflicts that wrap the globe are also beginning to cease. The Persian Gulf is no longer a war zone. The Soviets are leaving Afghanistan. The Vietnamese are preparing to pull out of Cambodia. And an American-mediated accord will soon send 50,000 Cuban troops home from Angola. The lesson of all this was, of course, that because we're a great nation, our challenges seem complex. It will always be this way. But as long as we remember our first principles and believe in ourselves, the future will always be ours. And something else we learned. Once you begin a great movement, there's no telling where it'll end. We meant to change a nation, and instead, we changed a world. Countries across the globe are turning to free markets and free speech, and turning away from the ideologies of the past. For them, the great rediscovery of the 1980s has been, lo and behold, the moral way of government is the practical way. Democracy, the profoundly good, is also the profoundly productive. When you've got to the point where you can celebrate the anniversaries of your 39th birthday, you can sit back sometimes, review your life, and see it flowing before you. For me, there was a fork in the river, and it was right in the middle of my life. I never meant to go into politics. It wasn't my intention when I was young. But I was raised to believe you had to pay your way for the blessings bestowed on you. I was happy with my career and entertained the world, but I ultimately went into politics because I wanted to protect something precious. Ours was the first revolution in the history of mankind that truly reversed the course of government.
Southern border should
and
be
with 3 little words.
Secure.
We, the people. We, the people, tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We, the people, are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast. Almost all the world's constitutions are documents in which governments tell the people what their privileges are. Our Constitution is a document in which we, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do. We, the people, are free. This belief has been the underlying basis for everything I've tried to do these past 8 years. But back in the 1960s, when I began, it seemed to me that we'd begun reversing the order of things. That through more and more rules and regulations and confiscatory taxes, the government was taking more of our money, more of our options, and more of our freedom. I went into politics in part to put up my hand and say, stop. I was a citizen politician, and it seemed the right thing for a citizen to do. I think we have stopped a lot of what needed stopping. And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. Nothing is less free than pure communism, and yet we have the past few years forged a satisfying new closeness with the Soviet Union. I've been asked if this isn't a gamble, and my answer is no, because we're basing our actions not on words, but deeds. The détente of the 1970s was based not on actions, but promises. They promised to treat their own people and the people of the world better, but the Gulag was still the Gulag, and the state was still expansionist, and they still waged proxy wars in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Well, this time, so far, it's different. President Gorbachev has brought about some internal democratic reforms and begun the withdrawal from Afghanistan. He has also freed prisoners whose names I've given him every time we've met. But life has a way of reminding you of big things through small incidents. Once during the heady days of the Moscow summit, Nancy and I decided to break off from the entourage one afternoon to visit the shops on Arbat Street. That's a little street just off Moscow's main shopping area. Even though our visit was a surprise, every Russian there immediately recognized us and called out our names and reached for our hands. We were just about swept away by the warmth. You could almost feel the possibilities in all that joy. But within seconds, a KGB recruiter pushed their way toward us and began pushing and shoving the people in the crowd. It was an interesting moment. It reminded me that while the man on the street in the Soviet Union yearns for peace, the government is communist, and those who run it are communists. And that means we and they view such issues as freedom and human rights very differently. We must keep up our guard, but we must also continue to work together to lessen and eliminate tension and mistrust. My view is that President Gorbachev is different from previous Soviet leaders. I think he knows some of the things wrong with his society and is trying to fix them. We wish him well, and we'll continue to work to make sure that the Soviet Union that eventually emerges from this process is a less threatening one. What it all boils down to is this. I want the new closeness to continue, and it will, as long as we make it clear that we will continue to act in a certain way as long as they continue to act in a helpful manner. If and when they don't, at first, pull your punches. If they persist, pull the plug. It's still trust, but verify. It's still play, but cut the cards. It's still watch closely, and don't be afraid to see what you see. I've been asked if I have any regrets. Well, I do. The deficit is one. I've been talking a great deal about that lately, but tonight isn't for arguments, and I'm going to hold my tongue. But an observation, I've had my share of victories in the Congress. But what few people noticed is that I never won anything you didn't win for me. They never saw my troops. They never saw Reagan's regiments, the American people. You won every battle with every call you made and letter you wrote demanding action. Well, action is still needed. If we're to finish the job, Reagan's regiments will have to become the Bush brigades. Soon he'll be the chief, and he'll need you every bit as much as I did. Finally, there is a great tradition of warnings in presidential farewell. And I've got one that's been on my mind for some time. But oddly enough, it starts with one of the things I'm proudest of in the past 8 years. The resurgence of national pride that I called the new patriotism. This national feeling is good, but it won't count for much, and it won't last unless it's grounded in thoughtfulness and knowledge. An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world? Those of us who are over 35 or so years of age grew up in a different America. We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get these things from your family, you got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost some at Anzio. Or you could get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. The movies celebrated democratic values and implicitly reinforced the idea that America was special. TV was like that too, through the mid-60s. But now we're about to enter the 90s, and some things have changed. Younger parents aren't sure that an unambivalent appreciation of America is the right thing to teach modern children. And as for those who create the popular culture, well-grounded patriotism is no longer the style. Our spirit is back, but we haven't re-institutionalized it. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. It needs production. So we've got to teach history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. Why the Pilgrims came here, who Jimmy Doolittle was, and what those 30 seconds over Tokyo meant. You know, 4 years ago, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, I read a letter from a young woman writing to her late father, who had fought on Omaha Beach. Her name was Lisa Zanetta Henn, and she said, "We will always remember. We will never forget what the boys of Normandy did." Well, let's help her keep her word. If we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. I'm warning of an eradication of the American memory that could result ultimately in an erosion of the American spirit. Let's start with some basics.
Complete.
More attention to American history and a greater emphasis on civic ritual. And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do. And that's about all I have to say tonight, except for one thing. The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat. And like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart together. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady, no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have fear. For all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hookered to the darkness toward me. We've done our part. As I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. So, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
Hello, KK. This Monday? Yeah. I thought that was with, Safa and Eli.
A question to President Reagan.
That's right.
President,
I don't
want to
think
raise
she
an issue that I
remembers.
think has been lurking out
We're
for
going.
2 or 3 weeks and
I
cast it
might.
specifically in national security terms.
We were gonna go the whole
You
day. They
already
were
are
gonna
the
show up in
oldest
the middle,
president
so we
in
can just
history.
show up
Some
with you
of
at a
your
certain
staff
point.
say
You can
you
do what you
retired
want,
after your
whenever.
most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale.
Perfect.
I recall
Perfect.
yet that President Kennedy
Perfect.
had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in
Yeah,
your
you told
mind
me.
that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all.
Well, when
It's
she's
true,
tired.
and I want
yeah.
you to know that also, I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience. If I still have time, I might add, Mr. Truitt, I might add that it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
I'd like to get to the fence and try to catch that one before it goes over, but I'll go on to another question.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Congress, honored guests, and fellow citizens. Today marks my first State of the Union address to you, a constitutional duty as old as our republic itself. President Washington began this tradition in 1790 after reminding the nation that the destiny of self-government and the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty
Research
is
complete.
finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. For our friends
Oh, I
in
have
the press
stealth
who
fighters.
place a high premium on accuracy, let me
They do
say,
too.
I did not actually hear George Washington say that. But it is a matter of historic record.
On our way here in Air Force One, I was looking down over your countryside out here because most of the way from I was looking down at the towers. And I could say that it reminded me of a story, but actually I wanted to tell the story whether anything reminded me or not. It was about a fella that was driving down a country road, and all of a sudden I looked out, and there beside him was a chicken. He was doing about 45, and the chicken was running alongside. So he stepped on the gas, he got it up to about 60, and the chicken caught up with him and was right beside him again. And then he thought, as he was looking at him, that the chicken had 3 legs. But before he could really make up his mind for sure, the chicken took off out in front of him at 60 miles an hour, turned down a lane into a barnyard. Well, he made a quick turn and went down into the barnyard too, and there was a farmer standing there. And he asked him, he said, did chicken come past you? He said, yeah. Well, he said, am I crazy, or did the chicken have 3 legs? He says, yeah, it's mine. He says, I read three-legged chickens. That was it, for heaven's sake, why? Well, he says, drumstick. Mom likes the drumstick. And now the kid likes the drumstick. And we just got tired of fighting for it. The driver said, well, how does it taste? He says, I don't know. I've never been able to catch it. Seriously, since...
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you. As Henry VIII said to each one of his 6 wives, I won't keep you long.
I spoke of the difference between our 2 countries. I try to understand the humor of the Russian people. We don't hear much about Russia. We hear about the Russian people. But you can learn a lot because they do have a sense of humor, and you can learn from the jokes they're telling. And one of the most recent jokes I found kind of, well, personally interesting. Maybe you might tell you something about their country. The joke they tell is that an American and a Russian were arguing about the differences between our 2 countries. And the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can hit the desk with my fist and say, President Reagan, I don't like the way you're governing the United States. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, what? He says, I can walk into the Kremlin, into Brezhnev's office, I can pound Brezhnev's desk, and I can say, Mr. President, I don't like the way Ronald Reagan is governing the United States.
I know that a lot of you have been having some fun with my advancing years. You even tied my recent surgery to my age. Well, I gotta be honest with you. I had that same operation when I was young, and it felt so good I wanted to have it done again before I was too old. But I am aware of my age. When I go in for a physical now, they no longer ask me how old I am. They just carbon date me. Incidentally, I've got a news item for you. We have a spin-off from our Star Wars research. It's a helmet for me to wear at press conferences. All I do is push a button and it shoots down incoming questions.
Research
You have
complete.
to admit, though, that my attitude is better than linebacker George Atkinson's when he was with the Oakland Raiders. Someone asked him what the player's reaction would be if the press box blew up. He said we'd have 30 seconds of respectful silence and then continue with enthusiasm. Now, honest, I don't feel that way. Maybe once in a while. Nancy, would you like to join me up here please? I know it's getting late here, but it's not often that we have so many people who've written about us and broadcast about us all together in one room like this, and I thought you might like to say a few nice words to them. They're all from the press and radio and television. Maybe just a friendly little greeting would do. How about just a word or two, something friendly, even one kind word?
I'm thinking.
Seriously, my friends, as always, we've had our share of laughs tonight at one another's expense, which is as it should be in a city where the issues are important and the passions run so deep. Maybe the fun and good nature of evenings like this is a good place to start.
So thank you for your hospitality and thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
Research complete.
Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. In all the 36 anniversaries of my 39th birthday, this has certainly been the most memorable. George, Barbara, all of you up here on the top shelf, together with me, and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, I am enormously touched. Yes, today is my birthday. 75 years ago, I was born in Tampico, Illinois, a little flat above the bank building. We didn't have any other contact with the bank. Now, here I am, sort of living that story again. To think of it as the 36th anniversary of my 39th, but I'll be just about due for a midlife crisis. In fact, I'm thinking about a career change. Drop this political business and see if I can't do something different like radio or the movies. Maybe I'll give politics another 3 years. This time of year always tends to be a summer. It's been swirling in every year. And the birthday, 36th anniversary of my 39th birthday.
Research complete.
I always think age is relative. There was once a very famous baseball pitcher, Satchel Paige. No one quite knew how old Satchel was, but he still was throwing that ball. And somebody asked him about that. His wise answer was, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? And that's how I came up with 39. And, well, the late Jack Benny had something to do with that. He was 39 for more than 40 years. I can't close without one story about doctors that he will understand very well. Have you ever noticed how easy it is if you're introduced to someone at a party or a dinner or something and he's introduced as doctor? And then there's always those people that suddenly start saying, Doctor, I've been having, well, we had a fellow in show business, Moss Hart, the playwright, who was an inveterate along that line. And so one night at a cocktail party in Hollywood, he was introduced to a Dr. Jones. And almost immediately he started talking about, I've been having this low back pain. And the fellow that introduced them said, Moss, Dr. Jones is a doctor of economics. And that didn't stop Moss at all. He said, Doctor, I was buying some stock the other day.
Production complete.
Outside just a moment ago, I saw a fellow trading 10 passes to the Reagan talk for one ticket to Frankie Valley. I'm mindful, too, that bringing things to a good conclusion is always a tricky business. We were told that I was a sports announcer at WHO Des Moines. But back in those days, the great evangelist Amy Semple McPherson was making a tour of the country holding revival meetings, and one of them in Des Moines. Now, the station thought it would be a good idea, an enterprising public relations man, to interview Amy Semple McPherson. But why they picked a sports announcer to interview that noted evangelist, I'll never know. But there we stood in the studio, and I asked her several that I thought were appropriate questions, and then she answered graciously, but then went into a very fervent plea about the success of her meeting. And I sat down. Till suddenly I heard her saying goodnight to a radio audience, and I looked up at the clock, and there were only 4 minutes to go. Well, I didn't know enough about Amy Semple McPherson that I could fill 4 minutes. So I got up, and in the days of radio, I just practiced and so forth. I started thanking the evangelist Amy Semple McPherson and so forth. Like this would be the record. Got out of the control room through the window, reached out, and was always such appearances, and picked one up and put it on. David,
Production
I said,
complete.
ladies and gentlemen, we conclude this broadcast by the noted evangelist Amy Semple McPherson with a brief interlude of transcribed music. I expected nothing less than the Ave Maria. The Mills brothers started singing Minnie the Moocher's Wedding Day. She never did say goodbye. She just slammed the studio door as she went out.
And by the way, on the matter of the INF treaty, I told the Senate not to worry about verification. I told them I'd take care of it. And while Gorbachev was here, I even made him write 100 times, "I will not cheat, I will not cheat."
Production complete.
Oops. Well, now, during my presidency, I've always emphasized diplomacy. But sometimes it comes to the point you have to use force in foreign affairs. And here I am, arm wrestling General Noriega for Panama. We really enjoyed our trip to China, and we're amazed that the population is over 1 billion people. And as you can see here, the lines are terrible. On another trip, the government of Indonesia gave us these gifts. They're our friends. Actually, I love this shirt. I finally found something louder than Sam Donaldson. Speaking of the press, remember during the conflict when the networks wouldn't let me on the air? I bet you wondered how I finally got my message out. It's no secret that the press and I sometimes don't get along. In addition to my standard ploy of using helicopter noise to avoid reporters' questions, I've now added a new method to avoid questions: tear gas. I've loved almost every minute I've been in office, although there were a couple of trips to the hospital. In case you're wondering what happened here, I had just said, "So, Don, you say you're going to write a book?" One of my greatest enjoyments is talking to the young men and women who defend us from attack. Here I am, on top of the White House. And the soldier is explaining where he thinks the next book will come from. It's fortunate that not everything has been spilled in these books, however. I mean, I hope the environmentalists never find out about this one. We used to fly Air Force One over Wyoming low and shoot buffalo from the window.
Production complete.
But I'll tell you someone I trust totally, George Bush. He's been a wonderful vice president. That's why I endorse him. Why I'll work hard for him this fall.
You here tonight do good, hard, creative work. And I respect that too. So, as we say our farewells here tonight, this service.
Good to get together. Summer vacations. Though it's true, summer vacations aren't always restful. You know that leads to the story. There's a fellow that was on his way to a mountain resort, and a policeman stopped him and said, "You know that you're driving without taillights." The driver hopped out of the car. He was so badly shaken that the officer took pity on him and said, "Well, now wait a minute, calm down. It's not that serious an infraction." The fellow said, "It may not mean much to you, but to me it means I've lost my trailer, a wife, and 4 kids." I was in Las Vegas some years ago to address the annual Farm Bureau meeting. On my way to the hall, a fellow recognized me and asked what I was doing in Las Vegas. I told him I was there, what I was there for. And he said, "What are a bunch of farmers doing in a place like Las Vegas?"
Research complete.
I couldn't resist. I said, "Buster, they're in a business that makes a Las Vegas crap table look like a guaranteed annual income." You know, there's a story about a pig and a chicken. They got tired of farm life, decided to find jobs in town. They no sooner arrived in town when the chicken spotted a sign in the window of a restaurant. It said ham and eggs, $1.25. The chicken suggested they go in and apply. And the pig said, "Wait a minute. For you, this job only requires a contribution. For me, it's a total commitment." You know, I can't resist. I'm accused. Some elements accuse me of too much of telling anecdotes and so forth. But I think it'd be appropriate before I say anything else that one of my favorite stories about government had to do with an employee who sat at a desk and papers came to his desk. He read them and determined where they were to go and initialed them and sent them out. And one day a classified document came there, but it came to him, so he read it, initialed it, and sent it out. 24 hours later, it came back to him with a note attached that said, "You weren't supposed to see this. Erase your initials and initial the erasure." Even Howard Baker's writing a book about me. It's called 3 by 5, The Measure of Perfect. Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but... Now... George Bush is doing well. George has been a wonderful vice president, but nobody's perfect. I put him in charge of anti-terrorism and the McLaughlin book is still on the air. But with so much focus on the presidential election, I've been feeling a little lonely these days. I'm so desperate for attention, I almost considered holding a news conference. I've even had time to watch the Oscars. I was a little disappointed in that movie, The Last Emperor.
I thought it was going to be about Don Regan. Now, one example is a story they tell. You know, the Regan was there for delivery after the order of an automobile. And so a fellow finally got the money together and was going to buy an automobile. About 1 in 7 families have it in that country. And he went through all the paperwork and everything and finally signed the last paper, laid down his money. And then the man behind the counter said, come back in 10 years, get your automobile. The man said, no, it's not the money. And wait. The fellow behind the counter said, well, what difference does it make 10 years from now? And he said, well, the plumber's coming in the morning. I know that some of you are no beginners when it comes to writing headlines. It reminds me a little bit of a cub reporter. You needed something to remind me of the story. A cub reporter whose first solo assignment was interviewing a fellow who was just going to have a birthday that made him the oldest person in town. He got the address of the new building out in the outskirts of the city. Got with a gentleman ushering in. He sat down. The reporter determined he was the man, and he said he was there for the interview, and he led right to the matter about how old are you, and he said 96. He said, to what do you attribute your longevity? And the fellow said, I don't smoke, drink, or run around with wild women. At that moment, there was a crash from upstairs. The reporter looked up, and he said, what was that? The old boy said, oh, that's Dad. He's doing it again.
You know, there was a time that being a Republican in this area of the country in high noon, outnumbered in a big way. I remember the story of the fella here a while ago who was running for Congress as a Republican. He stopped by a farm to do some campaigning, and the farmer heard he was a Republican. George laughed, and he said, wait right here. Not while I get Ma. She's never seen a Republican. So he got Ma. The candidate looked around for a podium to give his speech from. The only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Des Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. End of it, the farmer says, that's the first time I've ever heard a Republican speech. The candidate said, that's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform. Let's describe the story. Three fellas that went out of the building to get in their car and found they'd locked the keys in. They were locked out. One of them said, get a wire puller and pull it straight down and I can get it. The other one said, you can't do that. Somebody think we're stealing a car. The third one said, well, we better do something pretty quick because it's raining. It's starting to rain and the cop's down. This convention brings back so many memories to a fellow like me. I can still remember my first Republican convention. Abraham Lincoln giving a speech that sent tingles down my spine. No, I have to confess I wasn't actually there. The truth is, way back then, I belonged to the other party. Seems that 25 of San Francisco's top bootleggers. This is a little story to illustrate what I just said about Campbell. They were arrested back during those days of the Volstead Act. As they were being arraigned, the judge asked the usual question, of course, about their occupation. And the first 24 were all engaged in the same professional activity. Then he got to the last one, the 25th, and says, what are you? He asked the last prisoner, and the fella says, Your Honor, I'm a bootlegger. And the judge was surprised, but he laughed, and he said, well, how's business? He said it'd be a lot better if there weren't so many realtors around. President Alfonso and I have much in common. We both have gone through many campaigns and asked for votes from many different kinds of people. Down in Texas during the 1976 primary, they had me out knocking on doors. I remember one kind of rural area. I'd been governor of California. I wasn't all that well known in Texas, and I knocked on the door, and he said, "Oh, in his undershirt." James came to the door, and I told him I was running for president. And having been in the occupation I'd been in for a number of years, I was kind of surprised when he asked me what I'd done for a living. And I told him I'd been an actor. And then he asked me what my name was. And I thought, well, maybe if I give him a hint. So I said, well, my initials were RR.
Structure
and with that,
destroyed.
his face lit up, and he turned and he ran back into the house, and he was yelling, "Ma, Ma, come on out here quick. Roy Rogers is outside." So, of course, asking for help suggests a certain degree of trust. Which reminds me of the story. It has to do with a fellow that fell off a cliff, and he grabbed a limb on the way down, and there he hung, dangling above the rocky canyon, and he looked up and didn't see anyone, and he finally shouted out, "Oh, Lord, if you're up there, tell me what to do." A moment later, a voice came booming down from the heavens that said, "If you have faith, let go." He took another look down at the rocks 200 feet below. He looked up again and says, "Is there anyone else up there?" We're to the fourth cartoon. Now this one, it's titled The Great Communicator, but as you can see, there's been some mistake there. They left the balloon blank, so I think that I forgot what I was going to say. Reminds me a little bit of the story of the man that took his young son-in-law out and wanted to introduce him to golf. Told him all that he had to do and teed up the ball, and the kid took a swing and he missed the golf ball entirely, but hit a ant's nest there and into the air, and so lined up and took a crack at it, and again hit another gouge out of the ant's nest, and now there were ants flying all the way through the air, and as he lined up in the third try, 2 ants peeked out of the crater that he left, and one of them said, "If we want to survive this, we better get on the ball." Being a former Democrat myself, I know how difficult it is. We're proud to have you all with us. I have to tell you that I had started working for the party before I got into the 1962 state campaign in California, and I was speaking at a fundraiser, and a woman stood up in the middle of the audience. I'm going. She said, "I'm a registrar." She walked right down the middle aisle, put the paper up, and I signed up, and then said, "Now, where was I?" Could I just say something here about this? I'm half Irish, too. The other part is English and Scotch. But I just can't help but telling you, and you can take this with you as I'm going to take this with me. I was visiting Ireland and my father's ancestors' background and community and so forth, and then found myself on Cashel Rock, where St. Patrick erected the first cross. And the young Irish guide was taking us through
Alliance broken.
Cemetery. We came to one tombstone. He proudly pointed out, and the tombstone was inscribed, "Remember me as you pass by, for as you are, so once was I." But as I am, you too will be. So be content to follow me. And this had proven too much for some Irish who had scratched on the stone. I'll follow you, I am content. Which way you went. You know, so much of what we're trying to do, so much of this, depended on real communications. And I can't resist. I've told this story before, and some of you have heard it before. It illustrates communications. You'll have to forgive me, but life not only begins, or lumbago, I should say, not only begins at 40, but so does the tendency to tell the same story over and over again. But I've always thought of the importance of communication and how much a part it plays in what you and I, what all of us are trying to do. And one day, a former place kicker with the Los Angeles Rams, who later became a sports announcer, Danny Villanueva, told me about communications. He said he'd been having dinner over at the home of a young ball player with the Dodgers. The young wife was bustling about getting dinner ready. They were talking sports, and the baby started crying. And over her shoulder, his busy wife said to the ball player, "Change the baby." He was a young fella, and he was embarrassed in front of Danny, and he said, "What do you mean, change the baby? I'm a ball player. That's not my line of work." She turned around, put her hands on her hips. She said, "Look, Buster, you lay the diaper out like a diamond. You put second base on home plate. You put the baby's bottom on the pitcher's mound. You hook up first and third, slide home underneath, and if it starts to rain, the game ain't called. You start all over again." Something else I have to interject here, although this is not an occasion for humor. But I've had a kind of a hobby lately, collecting by way of dissidence stories that are told behind some of those iron curtains and those iron walls by the people themselves, showing their own cynicism about the system under which they're forced to live. And one recently that I heard had to do with 3 dogs that were having a conversation, an American dog, a Polish dog, and a Russian dog. And the American dog was telling him about how he barks, and then in our country, his master gives him
a city
his
has
toys.
been bombed.
The Polish dog said, "What's meat?" And the Russian dog says, "What's bark?" Reminds me of a story. In case you were wondering, this is my way of starting this. Many of you here work on East-West trade issues, and I like to collect stories that I can verify that the Russian people tell among themselves, so I'm going to tell you this one. It's about General Secretary Gorbachev. It seems that as part of the campaign to straighten things out there in his country, he had issued an order that everyone caught speeding, seen speeding, should get a ticket, no matter how important they might be. One morning he was out at his country home and realized that he was running late for a meeting that he had in the Kremlin, and he went out to get in his car and told the driver to get in the back seat that he'd drive. And he did. Down the street he went. They passed 2 motorcycle policemen, and the one of them took off after him. And a little while later he came back and joined his companion, the other motorcycle officer. The fellow said, "Did you give him a ticket?" He said, "No." Well, he said, "Why not?" Well, he said, no, this was someone too important. Well, he said, "We were told to give it no matter who it was, that they were get a ticket." No, he says,
Alliance broken.
Well, he said, "Who was it?" Well, he said, I don't know, I couldn't recognize him there. But his driver is Gorbachev. I have to tell you right here, I have been collecting stories that I can absolutely establish are told by the people behind the Iron Curtain in the communist bloc. And they're stories that reveal their kind of cynicism about the system under which they live. One of the more recent ones that I heard was about the man walking along the street at night, Moscow. A Soviet soldier called to him to halt. He started to run, the soldier shot him. And another man said, why did you do that? Well, he said, curfew. Well, he said, it isn't curfew yet. He said, I know. He's a friend of mine. I know where he lives. He couldn't have made it. Slander number 3. That does, I shouldn't, I know, but that does trigger another one of those stories I've picked up from over there. They came to General Secretary Gorbachev. They told him there was a woman in the Kremlin, she wouldn't leave unless she could see him. So he said, well, bring her in. And they brought her in. And he said, old mother, what is it? What? She said, I have a question. He said, all right. She said, was communism invented by a politician or a scientist? Well, he said, a politician. She said, that explains it. A scientist would have tried it on mice first. You know, there's a story about a young fellow from the city who hired out to work in the farm during the harvest season. On the first morning, everyone was up well before dawn. The new hired hand and the farmer made their way in the dark out to the oat field. Not one of them saying a word, and finally the city fellow asked what kind of oats were they going to cut. Wild oats or tame oats? The farmer, a little surprised, said, well, tame oats, of course. Why do you ask? Well, he said, I was just wondering why we're sneaking up on them in the dark.
Structure destroyed.
There's a story, and I understand it's true. It's about a newspaper photographer out in Los Angeles. It reminds me of Howard. He was called in by his editor and told of a fire that was raging in Palos Verdes, that's a hilly area in the southern part of Los Angeles County. And the photographer's assignment was to rush down to a small local airport, board a waiting plane, go out and get some pictures and be back in time for the afternoon edition. Well, he raced down the freeway, broke all the traffic laws, got to the airport, drove his car to the end of the runway, and sure enough, there was a plane revving up its engines, ready to go. He jumped in the plane shouting, let's go, and they were off. At about 5,000 feet, he began getting his camera out of the bag, told the fellow flying the plane to get him into the fire so he could get his pictures and get back to the paper. From the other side of the cockpit, there was a deafening silence. And then he heard those words he will always remember. Aren't you the instructor? You know, when I think of the welfare system, it reminds me of a story, and I know some of you have heard me tell this before, and maybe everybody knows it, but pretend that you haven't heard it, because I like to tell it. It's a story about a parent with 2 children, 2 sons, and one of them died in the wilderness. Both of them realistically, they talked to a psychiatrist about it, and he said he thought he could solve the problem. And they said, well, what? Well, he said, let's get the most magnificent set of toys any boy ever had, and we'll put him in a room. We'll take the pessimist there, and then we'll turn him loose, and when he sees those toys and knows they're all for him, he'll get over being a pessimist. We said, what are you going to do about the optimist? Well, he said, I have a friend who's got a racing stable, and he said, we can get quite a quantity of what they clean out of the stable, and we'll put that in another room, and when the optimist has seen his brother get those toys, and then he can get over being an optimist. Well, they did it. Finally, after a period, they then went in and followed in where the boy was with the toys, and he was sitting there crying. And they said, what are you crying about? He said, somebody's going to come and take these away from me. And they went down to the room with the optimist, and he was on the top of that pile of stuff, and he was throwing it over his shoulder as fast as he could. And they said, what are you doing? He says, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere.
Come a long way from that small town in Illinois, Dixon, and the protective warmth of your mother-in-law. What's your earliest memory of your mother's influence? She taught you, really shaped your life. Really. It wasn't maybe I had a brother, a couple of years older than I am, 4, 2 of us, and mother and father. And
She was probably the kindest human. Now, looking back, I know that we lived in poverty or pretty close to it all the time. But we didn't know that. Tell us she was always finding someone worse off that we would help. And I remember that about her. This kindness and all, and yet at the same time she could be firm, like the time in an even smaller town where I was born, Tampico, Illinois. And in those days, the biggest treat wasn't the ice cream wagon coming around, it was the ice wagon. The kids would get chips of ice from the iceman that was chipping the pieces out to put in the ice boxes along the way. And the ice wagon had pulled up over there, and my brother and I saw it. And he gave me over, took the lead, and we started across the little park. But a train pulled in between us and the ice wagon. And my mother came out on the porch just in time to see us get down and crawl under the train. Get to the other side. We were through at the ice wagon when the train pulled out. She met us in the middle of that little park. And we felt very familiar. Both of us applied along about midway in our backs.
Did she teach you other things as well, like how to read and how to get on in life, about the values of life?
Oh, she was always talking about things like that, but making great sense with them. But with regard to the reading, I don't know that she was aware that she was teaching us, but when we were very young, and at that point we lived in Galesburg, in a rented house there. My father was traveling around looking for better jobs. And she would read to my brother. When we went to bed, she'd get between us on the bed and read the bedtime story. But she always did it and running her finger on the line she was reading. And the two of us were there, and we could watch, and we could at the same time hear the chorus. Now, I don't know whether she was doing that deliberately, and I have no recollection of ever learning to read. But I was one night, when I was 5 years old, I was lying on the living room floor with a newspaper, and my father came in, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're reading the paper." And he thought I was being smart aleck. He said, "Well, read me something," and I did. The next thing I knew, he was out on the front porch yelling for the neighbors. And he brought the neighbors in and made me read for them because there was no kindergarten. I'd never been anyplace but at home at that time, a year away from starting regular school. But yes, I was reading the paper.
Your mother had very strong religious values as well.
Yes.
She believed in the power of prayer, for example. You believe in the power of prayer.
Yes.
Can you recall incidents in your life when you have prayed and God has answered your prayer?
Yes, I think I can. And I believe very much in what Abraham Lincoln said when he had this job. He said he couldn't perform the functions, the duties of this job for 15 minutes if he didn't know that he could call upon one at a time. But in that connection, I think my mother, a lesson that was hammered over and over again, and as I grew up, I really began to realize, and that is when there was a great disappointment, something went wrong. She would say, just everything happens for a reason and for the best. Now, she said, you may feel bad about this right now. Something will happen. And you will, in appreciating
research complete.
Say, if that hadn't happened, that supposed bad thing, this good thing would not have happened. And I had a classic example in my brother. I graduated from college in 1932.
Structure destroyed.
I was hitchhiking around. I'd set my mind on a career in the entertainment world. So I thought of starting if I could ever get into a sports announcer. Radio was pretty new in those days. And finally, I was
structure destroyed.
Disappointed. I'd had advice to just try to get a job in a station. Never mind what you wanted to do, and then take your chances on moving on from there. But I couldn't, and a very wise woman in a major station in Chicago told me that I was going at it the wrong way. I shouldn't be trying to destroy stations where they couldn't afford to hire inexperienced go out to smaller stations. But I hitchhiked home and arrived and was told that a Montgomery Ward store had opened in Dixon, and they had a sporting goods department. And they were looking for someone that was kind of well known in the town for his high school athletics there and so forth to head up that department. Well, I went down and applied. And I didn't get the job. A fellow a couple of years after me in high school, been quite a basketball sensation. He got the job. I was pretty disappointed. My father loaned me the car. I told him I drove 75 miles in my disappointment down to the Tri-Cities, Rock Island, Moline, and Davenport, Iowa. And there in a station in Davenport, Iowa, I met a program director. He still couldn't use me. And, but where was I? Because they had just hired an announcer a few days before. I didn't tell him I didn't listen to his station. But on the way out, talking all to myself, really, I said, how do you ever get to be a sports announcer if you can't get a job in the radio station? And when I'm down there, pretty soon I heard talking. He was very badly crippled with arthritis and 2 canes. And he was yelling out, you big so-and-so, wait. And he caught up with me, the elevator was full.
A city has been
He said about
bombed.
sports. And I said, well, that's what I'd like to be. But he said, you know anything about football? I said, I played it for 8 years. He said, could you tell me about a football game? And if I was at home listening to the radio, make me see it? And I said, I think so. He took me in the studio, stood me in front of a microphone. And he said, now when the red light goes on, I'll be in another room listening. You start broadcasting an imaginary football game. Well, I stood there waiting for the light, and I knew I had to have names, and I remembered the year before, that previous fall, my senior year, playing in a game when we went 65 yards in the last play for the winning touchdown. And it was the last play of the game. And I knew all our players' names, and I knew enough of the opponents' names that I figured I could. So I started in the 4th quarter. And I had the long blue shadows settling over the field and the chill wind coming in through the end of the stadium. We didn't have a stadium, we had bleachers. And then I ran a few plays, and finally I came up to the big play. And I had this and did the big play and made the touchdown with only 20 seconds to go and so forth. And then I grabbed the microphone and said, that's all. He came in and said, be here Saturday. I'll give you $5 and car fare. You are broadcasting the Iowa-Minnesota game.
Do you think that if Montgomery Ward had hired you for the sports department,
I might still be there with Montgomery Ward.
And not President of the United States?
Well, all the things in between that resulted in this wouldn't have happened.
You and I come from similar roots. I grew up in small towns of the Midwest as well, and life has changed for both of us, obviously. Many of the grand occasions that I've been privileged to be a part of, I've often thought back to my roots, to particular friends or incidents in my life, and I've wondered what they were like. Does that happen to you? When you're at a state dinner, or at the Kremlin, or when you're presiding at some ceremony, for example, in Normandy? Does Dixon flash through your mind in those days?
I think it takes reminders, and so far removed in that way of life and this one. But there are reminders every once in a while, just like this one that at length I gave you, that you will think back and say, hey, this maybe had a beginning there.
You went from Dixon to Eureka College, and you studied economics, among other things. You reminded your advisor for that from time to time. What have you remembered from your Eureka economics course that
A city has been bombed.
dealing with the national economy?
Well, I majored in economics and sociology. They were combined, so it was a single major. But then, you were really studying at a time when life was in the raw. This was the depth of the depth. We had a professor, wonderful, Daddy Gray. And he used to give us outside reading, books by economists to read. And then we'd come in with a book report and so forth, and then we'd discuss it. And I can remember a sense of humor also. There we were in the depths of the Depression, a book by a noted economist. And when we'd finished reporting and everything, just as the class was concluded, we'd say, it's interesting to note the author of this book, 5 weeks before the crash, said he saw no reason the stocks should not continue to rise and go. set you a little straight. But
Sticking to the Congress forevermore.
well, no, but the thing is, I say, at that time, you were really studying the classic example of economics and what was going to happen. This was prior to the election of FDR. And what were the second lessons? No one who didn't go through the Depression can ever visualize what it was like. 26% unemployment nationwide. The government going on radio with announcements. Don't leave home looking for a job. There are none. Well, there were no government programs at that time to take care of the people that suddenly were just destitute. My father, managing a shoe store with a kind of work partnership and ownership, was out. The shoe store was gone. And this was happening in little towns like Dixon as well as in the great cities. The National Guard in Illinois was mobilized and sent to parade in Chicago simply because there were so many who were living in doorways of the streets by that time, and the streets just off Michigan Boulevard, that they were real concerned about rioting and so forth. And we just did that as a show of strength.
There are still people in this country now who are homeless, who are still struggling economically and so on. And for some of them, it's a kind of continuation of the Depression. Is there a parallel between what's going on for some families in this country now and what happened then?
Well, there may be some, because there are a few spots in the country where, due to a change in industry and so forth, the principal industries in those communities, and it's a case of either move or bring a new industry into the community. There are a few trouble spots, but basically, as you know, 19 million new jobs have been created, and a large percentage of those have gone to the people most. So it isn't a situation comparable to that. And I think that you have to recognize that some of the people on the street have chosen that. Because right here in Washington, shelters, both private and public, that have been opened for those people have space in them, and people that can go there and won't prefer to be out there on the grates and so forth. And whatever their reason is, just remember that recently in New York, a young lady took a case to court to force them, under her constitutional right, to let her go back and live in that cardboard box out on the street.
President, let me ask you about your Hollywood career. You went from a good job in Des Moines, Iowa as a radio broadcaster in the height of the Depression to Hollywood, where you were making, what, $200 a week, I think, as a contract player at Warner Brothers?
Yes.
Did you begin to think about that time, gee, maybe there's a lucky star that's kind of hovering over Ronald Reagan, that luck is going to be a part of your life in some fashion?
Well, whether I called it luck or whether I called it answer to prayers, I realized that I was very blessed. And that's why I thought that also, and for those blessings, I ought to pay my way by doing whatever I could in return for others.
We're all starstruck in this society a little bit. When you arrived in Hollywood, who were the big stars that you remember seeing that really made an impression on you?
Oh, well, this was in the wonderful era of Hollywood that exists no more. The era when 7 major studios all had their list of contract players and stars. Their directors were under contract, the producers and writers. It was like a family in the studio. And at Warner Brothers, there was Jimmy Cagney and Pat O'Brien and Betty Davis, and Wayne Morris had just become a young new star there for Kid Galahad that he'd made. But and Dick Powell, Jack Carson, and well, you can go along with the trying to think of them all at the same time, but you'd eat there in the commissary at lunch, and they were all around you, be at the same table with you. It was a wonderful time, but also you were made to realize you were under contract now. They took me in and sat me down, and it was as if I couldn't hear, because they were all talking about me in front of me, and they were trying to decide on a name for me. I'd always used my kid nickname Dutch when I was a sports announcer, Dutch Regan. And they were talking and talking, and finally I was getting a little uncomfortable, and finally I said to them, because that was a pretty big radio station by then, I said, look, you know, my name's rather well known in a large section of the country. Do you think we just toss it off? And he said, Dutch Regan? And I said, well, my real name is Ronald Regan. I'd never used the Ronald. I like Dutch better. And they said, Ronald Regan. Ronald. Hey, that's not bad. I got to keep my own name, Ronald Regan.
Who were the actresses that you liked playing with in those days, starring with?
The Lane sisters had just come on big in a picture from Priscilla Lane. I was in a picture with Betty Davis, a wonderful experience. Such a great actress. And it was...
Air wings replenished.
Oh, good Lord. I'm forgetting some of the names.
What about Ann Sheridan?
Ann Sheridan, oh yes. I pictured with Ann Sheridan, and she was a great gal. She was wonderful.
You watch films, I know now, you know who the contemporary film stars are. It's very possible that they're going to make the story of Ronald Reagan. Now, if you could cast that story of Ronald Reagan, who would you like to play the part of you?
I'd rather they didn't make the story. If I can't play it, I don't know that I want to recommend anyone else.
Do you like current film stars? Do you have some favorites among the current crop of stars?
I'll tell you, the lack of continued publicity as we had when the fan magazines existed and everything, and each studio had a publicity department with men that were assigned to a group of performers there to see that their names were constantly before the public. That doesn't exist anymore. And I find a great difficulty in remembering. I saw them in another picture, but the names just don't linger.
You recently talked in your farewell address to the nation about films that had strong moral values and celebrated American patriotism. What are some of those films that you remember that did that?
What do you remember constantly? There are movies that remember titles of movies that were made, say, about West Point. And movies of that kind that the plot took place in the story with regard to cadets that were there in those schools. And then there were, of course, the service pictures and war pictures that were built and based on patriotism and so forth, and were pretty factual in their portrayal of those times. Yes, I think there was a great thought in Hollywood to make pictures that tied in to the things that people understood.
Mr. President, you also said in that farewell speech that you directed American children to sit down with their parents and talk about what America stands for and what there is to celebrate in this country. If you could lead that kind of a discussion at a dinner table, who would be the people in your lifetime that you would put forward as the patriots, the kind of model Americans who would serve to inspire coming generations?
Oh, I think there are any number. You could start with our people that go abroad go out into space in the shuttle. And but I think also it's more general than that. That I remember as a little kid, you knew that when the flag went by, you were to stand up and put your hand on your heart. You knew that you were to stand and sing the national anthem. And you learned to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And you also, history was required. And therefore you knew the beginnings of this country. And you knew the names of the great patriots and who George Washington was, but all the others. And I don't think that's true today. So often, well, and I won't name the university, don't want to embarrass anyone, but when not too long ago, third-year students, juniors in one of our large universities, couldn't tell anyone which side in World War II Hitler was on. Now, is there anything wrong with thinking that history not with regard to whether it's going to help you make a living or anything of that kind, but that everyone should know the background and the history of their country, how it came to be, and thus what our citizens' responsibilities are. Isn't it a little shameful that in this country, which had to fight for the independence of we the people, is now smaller and smaller, growing the number of people who bother to vote? How does anyone have the nerve to complain about any level of government?
Production complete.
Will Rogers once said that people elected to public office are no better and no worse than the people who send them there, but they're all better than those who don't vote at all.
Mr. President, you've had such an extraordinary life, starting, as I say, from that small town in Dixon, Illinois, when you were coming of age, working class family there. You've risen to great heights, President of the United States. You leave office with the goodwill of the American people behind you. What's the difference between being in this kind of a position, a member of the haves, I suppose is the best way to describe it in American life, and the earlier days of your life when you were a member of the have-nots?
Well, again, as I say, I recognize that for whatever reason I have been blessed. And never a day goes by that I don't say a thanks for that blessing. And also, I ask that I be given the wisdom to do something to show my thanks for that blessing.
I'm going to just pause here for a minute, because there are a couple of things that we haven't been able to get to that I would like to get back to in the anecdotal stuff. Yeah, okay, if we can agree on that, we'll be all right. Okay, I want to, okay. Mr. President, you had a very strong relationship with someone named Margaret Kleber.
Yes.
You're all but engaged to her.
Was engaged. I wore my fraternity pin on her.
You talked about your future together, probably.
Well, yes. She was the daughter of the minister of our church. And I knew that she was going to Eureka College, and it wasn't really that I made the decision then to go there. I'd already made that when I was much younger. My biggest hero happened to be the son of the then minister of the church, and he was a great high school football star as a kid. I saw him as a great hero. He had played football there. Later for the time, I was the chaplain at the university. But yes, we went together in high school, Eureka College. Before we got out of college, why, that was, I don't know if it still exists, yes, engagement by a ring shoot.
How did you think that your life together would take shape? I mean, what were your hopes then when you were going with Margaret Kleber?
Well, I knew that from my own background and so forth, I knew that I had to achieve a certain level of income before I could contemplate marriage. But I think that's the thing that romance didn't survive. She became a school teacher, and I was way over in Iowa there as a sports announcer, and a long separation. There wasn't a chance or possibility of visiting each other frequently. And then one day, I received a notice that she was engaged and marrying someone else.
She broke it off. You didn't break it off.
No. And a former teacher in high school of mine, that kind of teacher that every student has that you remember through your life, he wrote me a letter. He had also seen what had happened, and he wrote me a letter telling me how I was to react, and that I wasn't to do any foolish things like going off the deep end or anything. I remembered him, but again, it must have been one of those things that the disappointment that now you look back on and say, well, if that had happened, what I have now might not have happened.
There's a celebrated story in your years at Eureka College about one of your college football teammates, William Burkhart, was a black member of the team. And he couldn't get into a hotel where the whole team was supposed to stay, so you took him to your home in Dixon, Illinois, where he was immediately put up with another black teammate. People who look at that story say, well, Ronald Reagan seemed to be more sensitive about those kinds of things then than he has been as the President of the United States, and maybe it's because he bumped up against them in a first-hand way back in Eureka.
That whole thing has been the hardest burden, I think, of all that I have borne. That I am not as sensitive, that somehow I am discriminating and so forth. And it is not true. That household I was raised in, my mother and father, the thing my brother and I grew up knowing was that there was no greater sin than prejudice or discrimination. And this was back in the days when there was discrimination generally. And in Eureka College, yes, what happened was that we had to stay overnight in our hometown on the way, the bus, load of players on the way to a Saturday game. And I took the coach in, introduced him to the manager of the hotel, and he said that he'd take everybody but those two. Well, our coach, Mac, he said, well, we'll sleep in the bus. And he turned it, because the man had said also that no other hotel would like it in many hotels. And we started out, and I told him, Mac, I said, we can't do that. I said, if they'll know what the reason is and be embarrassed. Well, he said, what can we do? When he had told me that I couldn't stay at home, even though I had a home there. And I said, well, why don't we just say there isn't enough room for everybody?
Air wings
and
replenished.
Me and the two fellas in a cab, and we'll go home. And even then, he, feeling as upset as he did, he said, you sure you want to do that? And I said, yes. I knew my home. No chance to call her anything. Home, rang the doorbell, and Nellie came to the door. My brother and I decided to call our parents by their first name after we got to a certain age. Came to the door, and I said, Nellie, there isn't enough room in the hotel for all of us. Can we put up here? Well, you know, of course you can put up here when we can. And that it wasn't unusual for the way I was raised or brought up at all. And I still feel the same way. As governor of California, I appointed more blacks to executive and policy-making positions than all the previous governors of California put together.
And I asked you about your family because it was such an important part of your early childhood. You didn't have a lot of money in that family. Your father, as you've written in your own book, drank too much. He wasn't able to hold a job in a lot of different places. And yet you always stayed together as a family, even though there were big differences between you and your brother, Moon, for example, about how you see that and how you conduct yourselves. And here you are, the President of the United States, your financial future is secure, you've got a very good marriage, but within your own family now, there are these strains. Michael has written a book that has been critical of the way the family's been conducted. Patty and Mrs. Reagan are not talking. Is that just an affliction of modern life? Is that how we've changed in this country?
Well, it might be. Patty now, we feel, and we haven't given up. But Patty came up at that age when all the rioting was going on at the campuses, and I went near one of them, burning an effigy. But no, the rest of the family is united. And the book about that Mike, if you read it, it's a very unusual book. Mike was a doctor. And this was a book about this. And so the first part of the book is his attitude, which he's now confessing to. But the last part of the book, it's almost as if it's by a different human being. Nancy was the one who told him how to find his real mother when he wanted to. And